Everybody, this is the Kearney Board of Aldermen meeting. Call the meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Cindy, have you had a chance to take roll?
I've taken roll. Alderman Ashton King will be absent this evening, and you have the quorum.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to new employee introductions. I think one new employee for sure, but if any department heads have an introduction, if you can move forward and introduce your new employees.
No?
So I'm Shelley Daniel, Public Works Director. I'm here to introduce, we have a new street foreman, Helen Barber. Started today with us. He's bringing in experience. He worked at MoDOT here at the Kearney building in the past and for a concrete construction company in the past. So it'll be very valuable experience for us to have at the street department.
Great. Welcome to the city of Kearney. I'm sure your first day was amazing and look forward to working with you. Thank you so much. If you would like to stay for the entirety of the meeting, you're welcome, but now would be a good time to excuse yourself if you got a family or whatever to get back to. All right.
He's brave.
Next item on the agenda is open public comments. Are there any residents that live inside the city limits of Kearney that would wish to address the board tonight? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. Does anybody on the board have any questions or items that they would wish to discuss further on the consent agenda this evening? Seeing none, if we can consider a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda passes as presented. Next item on the agenda is items for review and presentation. We have a presentation this evening of our proposed fiscal year 2026 budget. This is just a presentation. There will be no decision made by the board this evening, but I'll turn it over to our city administrator for her presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. I am trying to find out what my presentation is there. And so tonight we're going to do an in-depth review page by page of the proposed budget. And as luck would have it, I cannot see the arrows with the Zoom.
I think if you exit full screen.
I will have to exit my presenter view.
Yeah.
So, okay, we'll do it this way then. Perfect. So this proposed budget includes $31.9 million of revenue. If you turn to page 11, which is the budget summary of all funds, you can see that very first column. That is the estimated, where it says estimated fund balance on April 1st, 2025. That is the estimated cash that each fund is expected to have at the beginning of the year. And then that second column that says proposed current year revenues, you can see the total is $43.5 million. 31.9 million of that 43.5 is revenues. And then we have some debt proceeds that we're anticipating getting to fund some projects, and then the balance is transfers. So we have interfund transfers that will be sent from, for example, the use tax fund to a sidewalk construction fund. Those are included in each of these numbers as inflows and revenues for the fund. But when you look overall, the city is expecting to get $31.9 million of revenues that are not transfers and not debt, if that makes sense. And please interrupt me at any time that you guys have any questions. I do want to point out, if you can see this slide, the biggest portion of our revenues come from charges for services. $10.1 million of charges for services are included in this year's budget. These are fees that are billed for specific services, and the fee or charge is based on the actual cost of the services that are provided. So think recreation fees. When you sign your child up for soccer, or you sign your child up for baseball, you pay for that service for your child to participate, instead of us taking tax money and supplementing that cost. Then our next biggest category of revenues that are coming in this year's budget are federal grants. We actually have $8.4 million of federal grant funds included in this year's revenues. Sales taxes are our next highest source of revenue. $6.2 million is the amount of taxes that are received from sales on taxable retail purchases. And then we are receiving intergovernmental funds. So those are funds from other governmental agencies. For example, we receive money from MoDOT for the state gas tax funds. That is included, that is an intergovernmental. If we receive funds from a CID, that is intergovernmental. We also receive funds from Clay County, and that is intergovernmental. Different from a federal grant, but still received from another government. Property taxes only make up $1.7 million of our total budget, and use tax makes up $1.4 million. Our franchise taxes are $1.2 million, and then we have about $700,000 of other revenues, which are licenses and permits, fines, interest income, and then some miscellaneous other amounts. And then if I go to the next slide, I'm looking at that third column, proposed current year expenditures. I did something a little bit different. I think when we have it listed by fund, you can't really see how we are spending the functions and the services that we're providing. So what I did is I presented this and accumulated it more like our audited financial statements are accumulated, to kind of show how much money we are spending on each of the services that we provide. And so I did it two different ways. $15 million of our total expenditures are operating costs. And then we spend $4.5 million every year on principal and interest on debt. And then $30.6 million of this year's budget is on capital projects or capital outlay. So they're not expenses that are continuing each year. They're kind of one-time investments that then we will get many years before we have to reinvest to replace that.
Quick question on that. Out of the portion that we use for debt service purposes, any of that, are we paying ahead of schedule, or are we just paying as we should?
We are just paying as we should. Then, so I kind of calculated it that way, and then I calculated it by function. So the biggest investment that we are making in this year's budget is this $19.5 million into streets, sidewalks, and trails. That is a lot of those capital projects and capital outlay. And then, but of our operating expenses, our biggest expense is public safety. And that's $4.6 million for public safety. Public safety includes both police and the court, because they kind of work together. So I think it's important to kind of know what is included. In general government, we have community planning, code enforcement, community services, the historic museum, cemetery, and animal control expenses, $3.8 million. Water, $13.5 million. A big chunk of that is for capital projects. The water tower we didn't pay for it all in this year, so those expenses have been carried over to fiscal year 2026. We have $3.9 million, almost $4 million for wastewater treatment plant and wastewater collection. The economic development amount, that $1.3 million, that's entirely the amount that we are paying for shops at Kearney TIF. And so it's all related to those contractual obligations. And then trash and recycling, $1.2 million, and parks and recreation, $2.3 million. So you can kind of see now where the biggest bulk of our investment is going to be for this year. And a lot of that is due to federal grants that we have received. This slide really talks about things that are going to affect, so I didn't have to talk about it, every single department. Some of the things that when we're going through our budget book that I think are really important for you to keep in mind are that included in this year's budget is a one-step 2.5% merit increase for each employee on their anniversary. There are grade market adjustments for positions. None of those affected employee pay. When those are going to come into effect is if we have a vacant position that we are hiring and trained to fill, it affects our salary range. There was a decrease in employee health, dental, vision, life, and long-term disability premium expense in this year's budget, but there was also an increase, much larger, of workers' compensation premiums and loggers expense. And then we increased employee training and professional development expenses. I think it's important here to notice that of our operating costs, we are providing services with those operating costs. So you provide services with people. And so you can see of our $15 million of operating costs, $5.2 million of that is salaries and wages. $2.1 million of that are employee benefits. And then almost $200,000 of professional development expenses.
Shayla, what is driving the increase in loggers? Is it that we're inputting at a higher rate, or is it salaries or more employees?
It was a market valuation this year. So they do an evaluation date each year. They do evaluation of the plan, and then they calculate what should we be paying to be able to fund. The state statute does not allow them to, it caps the amount that they can increase our contribution to 1%. And the reason that I know that it's because of the market valuation is because both general employees, we have two rates. We pay one for police and one for general employees, and both of them went up the 1%.
Okay.
Okay, and so just keep that in mind. So every fund, as we go through it, if it has salaries and benefits, that is going to be an impact. The 2.5% merit increase, the increase in workers' comp, the increase in loggers' expense, and increase in professional development. Instead of me saying it multiple times throughout the night, I thought I would just cover it at the beginning. Okay, and so this brings us to the general fund. And this is on page 12 if you want to look at your budget book, or you can see it kind of prettier, I think. I tried to make it prettier on the slide. But on this is a summary page because there are several different pages of departments. And so the important things, I think, first of all, we're not allowed to not have a balanced budget. Our budget must be balanced. It's state law, it's required. And so one of the things that we're always looking for is to make sure that we have a balanced budget. And you can see our operating revenues. So not counting the fund balance, the cash on hand that we're planning on having at the beginning of the year. Our operating revenues that are coming in next year total almost $8.9 million. Our operating expenditures, so those are things like salaries and benefits and supplies, things, subscription costs, things that we're going to have to make sure that we have money for every year, because it's a continuing expense, is 8.6 million. So our revenues over expenditures for operating is $284,949. And then we are also planning on $980,000 of capital outlay costs. So those are things like a vehicle, or they're something like a server, things that we are going to buy, and we're not going to have to pay for it again the next year. It's maybe 5 years down the road, or it's 3 years down the road, and we're keeping those separate. And let's say that we went through a really lean time, we might be able to stretch it for 2 additional years past its normal useful life. Where operating expenses, you can't do that. Like, those expenses come due every year, if that makes sense.
But does that show a shortfall of $675,000?
So where that is coming from is from our fund balance, so that cash that we think that we're going to have at the beginning of the year to start off, we're using that fund balance and the current year revenues.
So we're short $675,000. Last year, we were short $425,000. Year before that, we short $285,000. We were at $3 million, now we're sitting at 1.4, so we're eating up our reserves.
Yes, we are. We've went very many years we've went a lot of years with by not replacing our capital or having a plan.
How long can we do that?
So we're projecting that at the end of this year, we'll have a $1.4 million fund balance, which is 2 months of operating expenses, which is pretty reasonable. If some tragedy happened and maybe a tornado came and hit town, we are going to be able to get FEMA, but it might take a little bit of time. So we want to make sure we have enough money in reserves to be able to spend, to be able to pay employees while we're waiting for FEMA. So you guys can set your fund balance at any amount that you want, but in order to be able to purchase the things the tools that employees are saying that they really need in order to do their job, this is the proposal, and you guys get to change it however you want.
I think it's important to kind of know the why behind some of that too, and let's keep in mind the treasury money. We had a little over $2 million parked that we couldn't use for a couple years. I think that falsely inflates our reserve balance as well. We had to keep it on deposit for a certain amount of time before we could turn around and use it, so that inflates that a little bit too, I believe.
And one other thing, so we're budgeting very conservatively, right? Like, we're budgeting for revenues conservatively, and we're budgeting for expenditures conservatively. So if you would like to look at page 12, right here, you can see that last year, what we had planned on in the column that says fiscal year 2025 amended budget, we had planned on ending the year with 1.5, but when we look at the fiscal year 2025 department estimate, we really think that we're going to end the year at 2.1, because what we are budgeting for, especially with salaries and benefits, is that every single position is full all year long, and that if it's a vacant position and we do not know what that employee is going to pick when they start working here, if they're going to have family coverage or if they're going to have individual coverage. Every vacant position is always budgeted for family, which builds in a little bit of cushion because you never know what's going to happen. And so I do think but I can't promise that it's always gonna be like that, right? Like, we are making estimates. We are coming up with numbers 18 months in advance. And so a budget is a projection. We don't have the crystal ball to know how things are really going to shake out. We could have a downturn in revenues and that we weren't anticipating. So there are so many things. So that's why those monthly financial reports are super important.
Well, that brings me to the very point you're making of that $500,000 difference there. Is that going back into our coffers or are we spending it?
So if you notice the $2,111,513 there in that department estimate, it goes right back up here to, in fiscal year 2026, under fund balance, so that we can figure out, like, does any of that need to be allocated? So I think that's really important for everyone to kind of understand how that works. This is why we do the cash carry over true up budget amendment right at the beginning of the year, because we're guessing that we're going to end the year with $2.1 million. The past few years, we've had even more than our department estimate. And so we have done a budget amendment to make sure that we're reflecting that that money goes back into reserves. And you do have a team of employees that are super cognizant of that, and we don't really ever want to come back to you guys and tell you that we're going to have to cut expenses in the middle of the year. That is not good for employees. It's not good for people that have been planning out how they're going to meet your guys' goals and expectations for the year. And so we do really err on the side of conservatism.
So then in reality, we're short 1.2 million. But then you're just gonna give back any surplus from there to bring it down. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how
I don't understand that question, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
well, it shows here that you got $500,000 over that you made, and you're pulling it over to 26. But in
2.1,
26, we're already gonna be short $675,000. So if you add those two together, that's like $1.2, $1.3 million.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Dan, I'm not following you either, I'm sorry.
Well, you're saying here that you've got, we projected at 1.5, but now we're thinking we're gonna be at 2.111. So there's $500,000 there that you're just rolling back over as income to next year. But at the end of next year, we're gonna be short $675,000. So if we didn't roll over that 5, if we put that 5 back into our coffers, that's more like our actual budget's closer to 1.2 short, right?
Where are you getting the
And the difference between the 1532,663 and the 2,111,513 on page 12.
Okay, so our budget, when we budgeted, we thought we were gonna have end the year with 1.5. But because, and that was based on
But we
7.
actually ended at 2.1.
Yes.
So the accounting there, it's in parentheses, but it's a good positive, not a negative.
Well, the 568,000 negative, that is just what the request was from all the departments
department heads.
before we balanced the budget. So the departments said, okay, we really need, in order to do the best that we can, like what we actually need is we need $11.6 million of expenses. So that fiscal year 2026 department request column, that is just what departments requested. It's not.
Not historical representation.
It has nothing to do with anything historical. That fiscal year 2026 department request column, that is simply what was requested by when all the departments turned in their budget requests.
Okay,
So they requested $11.6 million of expenses. There was not enough money, and so what is being proposed is 9.6. So we reduced,
okay, that's following me now.
okay, good. I was so confused.
Well, no, now, when you said that you reduced it down to carry it, I follow you now.
Yeah,
I still had it over here.
Sure, no, that makes sense. It's really hard to know what somebody else, yeah, so
No.
thank you.
When you said that, it clicked. I'm sorry.
Nice, good.
Sheila, if I could say one more thing here real quick before I forget. You told us to jump in whenever, so I'm
Yeah,
going to.
no, please.
I just want to point out, and you hit on some of it, but for all of our residents and business owners watching live and here in the audience, I want to point out that our city administrator does a really good job of a cover letter to this budget. I think it's 11 or 12 pages this year. It was, the last couple budgets have had a long cover letter as well. I encourage anybody to take the time and review our budget in detail, but if you really just look at the first 10 pages of that cover letter that you did, it really explains the why and any big changes and anywhere grant funding, it just kind of points out a lot of the changes year over year. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that as well before we got too far ahead.
Sure.
So since the mayor brought that up, one of the questions that I had, you talked about the budget has an increase of $8.4 million, but 7.9 million is federal grants. Can you explain where those grants are going?
Most of those grants are going to the 19th Street Complete Street Project. So making improvements from Watson Drive to Meadow Lane along 19th Street. And then also improvements specifically to the intersection at 19th and State Route 33. Additionally, there is quite a bit of grant funding in our budget this year that is new for the pathways projects for the to finish up the use tax sidewalk sections that were promised to voters. It will not all be done this year. It's going to be multiple years, but we need to make sure that we have our match and that we have a good estimate of what the total project is, and that's why we put it all in this year. We're trying to make sure that we have all the components to accept that federal award and then do the projects.
So I noticed in one of your, and the only reason I bring this up is because it's been talked about for decades. You talked about 2.2 million in sidewalk and trail construction for pathways. And one of the projects that you identified was Regency Drive. Are we actually going to get sidewalks on Regency Drive?
We will, but it will take a few years. So there are the steps that you have to take, but we did receive a grant funding for that. And then Shelley and her team will be working to get right-of-way acquisition and all of the things that you have to do before we can actually start construction.
Well, that was gonna be my next question. Okay, so have we started the right-of-way acquisition yet, if we're gonna do Regency Drive?
So that grant, no, we haven't, so there are certain federal rules that that have to take place, and you guys have not even formally accepted the award of the grant yet.
Okay.
However, just a couple of weeks ago, Mark finalized our award.
Yeah, so
I keep looking at Shelley while she keeps encouraging me. Yeah, you got it. So,
I don't know.
yeah. So, you guys ready to head to page 13? This page shows the administrative expenses that are shared by all of the different funds. So it doesn't make sense to hire a payroll person for the general fund, for the police department, and then hire one for the water department. Doesn't make sense to hire a utility billing clerk to bill out trash and another one to bill out water fees. And so what governments do is you budget for all of those shared expenses in a certain place, and then those costs are allocated to all of the different funds. And so that's what this is doing. So you have the city hall and the public works budget. Those are where the shared expenses are located in the general fund. And then that total amount gets allocated to all of the other funds for their portion, their share of that. So you're talking about legal services, financial reporting, payroll, accounts payable, IT, utility billing, and hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And so these amounts that come back into the general fund, they're actually shown as a fee to the general fund because they're being paid by the other funds. And so we'll see that. If you turn to page 14, you can see that we have a total $8.9 million of revenues in the general fund. That's $1.1 million more than last year, 13.6% higher. Part of that is a grant, a federal grant that we have not been awarded yet or gotten notice that we have been awarded, but we have applied for, and we are anticipating there are some expenses in our capital outlay that are due to that grant. If we don't successfully get the grant, then we're not gonna be able to spend and purchase the equipment. But it's $200,000. Charges for services are up. The reason that's two reasons. One is the shared administrative costs, and the other is the solid waste fees due to our new contract. And then fines are also up. E-ticketing has really streamlined the process and improved traffic enforcement efficiency, and so our fines are up compared to last year. Property taxes and franchise taxes, all of those are really flat this year, as well as the other categories. And then, does anyone have questions about that? If not, we'll head over to the city hall budget on page 16.
Can we,
Yeah.
so on page 14, under the plan review fees, there's a big drop. Is that because we now have an engineer on staff?
So these are revenues coming in.
Okay.
I don't quite know why. Last year we budgeted $14,000. You can see in the fiscal year 2025 estimate, we only really think, so you can see in 2024, we got $762. It did go up, but not 14,000. So maybe that was like an extra zero. Or like, I'm not sure what happened in that 2025 amended budget because that was really a long time ago and I'm not quite sure. But you can see in our department estimate column, we're estimating that we're gonna get $1,402. And then for fiscal year 26, we're estimating just flat $1,400. If that makes sense.
Right, and that's what you talked about, fees coming in being flat, and then all of a sudden you see the stark difference between 24 actual and 25 amended.
Yes. Our budget last year, our amended budget, and
Is it because the year before there was a lot of construction going on?
maybe, I'm not sure. I'm so sorry, I don't remember, but I could dig into it and see my notes if you are really interested.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see, because that's a big difference.
And review fees for 2025. You guys have any other questions about revenues? If not, we'll head to the city hall budget on page 16. So the big changes, so like I said, this department provides administrative services for all city departments and funds. So in here are public communications, financial reporting, accounts payable, payroll, records management, IT, legal services, so all city departments and utility billing. And the big changes here, there are 2 brand-new positions, the only 2 positions that are proposed for this year's budget based off of your initiatives for fiscal year 2026, and that was an HR manager and a communications specialist. And so that impacts a little bit, plus the 2.5% step, plus the changes in employee benefit costs. Also included in here that is different than last year, we have licensing and permitting software in the software maintenance line item. And then our property and liability insurance for the 2025 amounts, that includes deductible costs related to claims, where those costs are not included in fiscal year 2026. We're going through an appeal right now, and so that's where those costs got expended from. And then in the goodwill line item, we had money in there to replace flags and banners. That's not in fiscal year 26 because those banners and flags should last at least 5 to 7 years, is the hope. Our last ones did really well. So, anybody have questions about City Hall? Then if we go on to page 17, this is called non-departmental, and it's our transfers up from the general fund to other funds. We are making transfers to the park. We did increase that park transfer this year by $13,000. We also take general fund money and we transfer it to the cemetery, and then we transfer money for debt service that the Park Capital Improvement Fund and the Wireless Capital Fund are paying. They're not generating enough funds to pay for that, so the general fund is supplementing it.
Sheila, on, excuse me, the transfer to the cemetery fund, have we considered reevaluating the cost that we sell cemetery plots for to try to, at a minimum, for that entity to break even on its own, or try to slowly start moving? I know we've received some very generous donations from residents that have passed away that have helped us booster up our interest income on that fund, but just something maybe to think about if the board wouldn't disagree with my ask there. But I think trying to find a way for that fund to stand on its own and not have to be supplemented by our general fund would be something to consider, I think.
You know, I don't think I ever remember that coming to me to raise that. It's probably been the same
For years.
for years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it probably does need to be that.
It'd be interesting to see cost comparison, our cemetery versus, not all of it. See what the comparison.
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion. The only thing that I'm gonna ask Sarah is if we look at cost, I wanna see if maybe they're city, we can look at other cemeteries that are city-owned and operated that all the expense information is public knowledge too, because they could have $15 million in a fund that that we don't. So that would just only be my request, is just to make sure that we have a true apples to apples comparison.
Sure. If we are ready to turn to page 18, this is the municipal court fund. And you can see almost 68% of this fund is personnel costs. And then there are really not any changes other than inflation. And then the next page is page 19, and this is the Community Development Fund. And there are really 2 changes that were made in this fund. One of them is that we didn't change the employee count, but we were hoping to be able to, instead of having a building inspector, to possibly do a certified building official. So it's just an incremental cost. Maybe we wouldn't find somebody that was qualified to be a certified building official, and we would instead hire the building inspector position. But what this budget does is it includes a little bit of room so that we could, if we could find a qualified candidate, we would be able to have a certified building official on staff. And then the other really big changes with the abatement costs, that very bottom line there in the budget, those costs are calculated where we have revenues coming in to cover those abatement costs, because those costs eventually get reimbursed by whoever's property was cleaned up and remedied. But those are the big changes in this year's budget. I don't want to go too slow for you guys, so please, I'll just kind of plow ahead, but please don't hesitate to jump in. The page 20, economic development, yeah, because we have a lot of pages left to go. So the economic development, this is really just what the money that we are contributing to the Chamber of Commerce. It's $20,000 every year, and there's no proposed change to that. The next page is the Firehouse Center, and that is the money that we are contributing to Kearney Enrichment Council. The only change here is with the property and liability insurance premium, which is the property premium for insurance on the actual building. That has previously been shown in the City Hall budget, and I think it's very important to kind of show the actual true costs of programs so that you guys can make the best decision always. And so I added the property and liability insurance premium due to that building in here. So it looks like it's increased, but really everything's the same, just moved that premium to reflect that building.
Sheila, could you, 58010 Goodwill, do you know off the top of your head what that's for?
It's the Magical Night fireworks and some inflatables for Oktoberfest.
Okay, thank you.
The next page is the Historic Museum. Same thing, everything's the same except for property and liability insurance. That premium wasn't showing under the Historic Museum, and I just moved that to be reflected right
To show
here.
that they're properly budgeted for their own. So it looks like an increase, but the only really increase is the difference of charging them for their own property insurance.
Yes. And it's not that we're charging them, because we were paying it anyway, but we're just
Properly categorizing.
showing
Yeah.
it differently to properly reflect the true cost. And then we have the police department's budget. This is $193,000 more than last year, $3.3 million. It's probably one of the most important services that we provide, in addition to water and sewer, to residents. And so that's why there's such a huge investment. Of course, we don't charge residents when they call 911 for an officer to come out. So it's completely covered, the cost, by taxes. Their big changes are data storage and backup services are included in their software maintenance. They had also cybersecurity subscription services are also now included in the software maintenance. We were able to increase their training and meeting expense in their proposed budget this year. You can see a change in drug dog care and certification. We increased that. There is a small increase allotted for possibly the dispatch from the county that we are receiving.
That's the only question I had on, have we received a like, what does our contract allow? Have we received a notification of an increased cost, or is that when we anticipate one?
We have received a meeting request.
Okay,
And we are guessing and trying to make sure that we have, again,
Very fair.
budgeting conservatively. Like, we want to make sure that we're not having to come back to you and saying, come back and cut something else.
Tomorrow, Mayor. With Kevin.
So, and then, really, those are the big changes that I noted. I don't know if you have any other questions
What
about that.
happened to the auto insurance?
So I'm taking out the auto insurance line item and combining it with the property and liability, because autos are really property and liability. And so you can see, like, we've been breaking them out, and then I just smushed them together into the property liability insurance line.
And you took, I'm assuming animal control came in under the city hall budget?
It's under community planning.
Okay.
David, that's a good point, and that's, I know you know this, but I'm gonna say this twice to remind our constituents and business leaders and community is, year over year, when you look at the differences of salaries per departments, we've realigned and reorganized departments. So when you look at the true net gain of our expenses for salaries, you have to take into consideration all the, our, that we have truly just reorganized and restructured a lot of our departments. This is case in point, animal control now. We have a full-time animal control officer that's not under the police department anymore. So it may make one department look like there's a massive increase in salaries and wages, while one may go down, and a lot of times that it's pretty easy to kind of connect those dots.
Right.
If you go to the page 25, this is the Public Works Department. This is one of those administrative support departments, because they spend so much of their time really focused on water, wastewater, and transportation, but they also support park capital projects, and they support, the police department when they have a question, an engineering question, things like that, or when somebody needs a GIS map. And so the big changes here are training, professional development, and tuition reimbursement. So it hasn't been in the past that we've had very many employees exercise the tuition reimbursement, but you will see that reflected in this year.
So you've got under salaries in the 2025 department estimates, 415,000, 26 proposed budgets, 496. Is that again that 1%?
If you look at department estimate compared to proposed, that is going to reflect the vacancies that we had during the year.
Okay.
So I think a better gauge when you're looking at personnel costs, try to look at the amended budget compared to the proposed budget, because we are budgeting for an entire, for a position to be filled that entire year. But when we are calculating what the department estimate is, there is oftentimes savings because we don't have every position filled for the entire year. And then if you go to page 26, this is the solid waste department. You can see that this is the same, except for we have a new solid waste disposal contract. And so this is reflecting those costs.
Have we received any correspondence from our new contractor about, I know there was communication that the dump fee was going up?
Their dump fee is going up. I actually just talked to them not today, but I think on Friday, and they are not planning on requesting an increase at this time.
That's nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's impressive.
I gave a very firm directive to our city administrator. I wasn't pleased with even that being brought up, so.
Still impressive that they didn't.
I didn't even tell them that yet.
Well, they know now.
Just so you know, they did it without your,
That makes it even better.
Yes.
And I'm not surprised. They've been doing a really good job.
They have.
they have. We almost spend almost no time other than delivering cards. Like there is not.
That's how it should be.
And the other amazing thing, you guys, they have cameras installed on their trucks. And so there's no question if somebody's trash was out there when their cart went by. And it's just so nice because you never want to argue with anybody when they say that their cart was out there. And we don't have to. It's great. So the capital outlay, the items that we are really spending, Alderman Holt, savings, our fund, our reserves, but really important things. Like we have money in there for workspaces. We have 2 additional people that we are gonna have to find suitable accommodations for them if they stay in the proposed budget. And then we have computer network equipment. We have been neglecting that area of our budget, and we are working hard. It's very important to have decent, safe, compliant computer and network equipment. Then we have a economic development capital planning / consultant. It's probably not going to be, it's not in operations because we're not going to be spending money for that every year. It will kind of be a one-time as needed. For example, we use it for the future land use map, some of that money. And then we've just carried over the balance. And so that was actually in last year's budget, and then we used a little bit of it and we just carried over the balance, if that makes sense. Payroll upgrade, again, carried over from last year because they didn't get that project done because they were doing so many other projects. Community development permit and license software, also money for a consultant for that. David used that this year for the land use ordinance changes that you guys had a presentation on at the last meeting, and then we'll consider at your next meeting. And then police, computer network equipment, dash body worn cameras. Part of that is being paid, I think 60-something thousand of that is due to a grant. Patrol rifles, 42,000. I don't know if you've had the opportunity or remember from Chief Thomas's presentation to you guys about Vietnam era rifles.
That we technically don't even own.
Yes, I mean, we have some serious capital needs, and I wish that we had additional revenues, and the public safety sales tax could actually help with that. Patrol rifles, 42,000, Glock handguns, 34,630, and $230,000 for patrol vehicles. So some very important capital items to give staff the tools that they need to do their jobs.
I got a question just for clarification. I'm curious. Engineering tech truck. What is
Yes.
that?
That was the engineering technician positions truck from last year.
Okay.
Yep. It was actually a truck for one of our new positions that was added last year.
I didn't know if that was like a hand truck,
No.
like a two-wheeler or what.
No.
What is that?
Expensive too.
Well, I didn't know, because over here she had patrol cars, so it's like, well, wait a second,
Yeah.
that's a different truck?
Yeah,
Okay.
good question. So I actually have the next 3 pages all in one slide here. So if you look at page 29, this is the DWI drug fund. This revenue, so the reason that money that's in the general fund is not restricted by law for a specific purpose. The whole rest of the budget, all of the money that we're going to be talking about cannot be used for just any purpose. There is a legal requirement to use it for something specific. And so these are the DWI drug fund. It collects court costs and fines from DWI and drug cases. And it can only be used for equipment that is related to DWI drug arrests, not continuing expenses. It has to be those capital outlay items. And so
Would
we have
that include any specialized training for like DRE or anything, or strictly capital outlay?
Capital.
Okay.
strictly capital.
So like breathalyzers and nothing? Okay.
So, and I don't know when the last time we've purchased anything, and you can see over many years, it's accumulated. We think by the end of next year, it will have almost $16,000 in it. So we're not getting a lot of money. I'm sure that equipment is really expensive, and so probably the general fund has just been funding it because it probably doesn't bring in enough. But we don't want to accidentally spend that money for something else, which is why it's in its own segregated fund, if that makes sense. The next page 30, this is the use tax fund. So we have a lot of transfers going to capital project funds. The reason that we are transferring funds to capital project funds is it's easy to accumulate in a capital project fund costs of projects that are going to go on multiple years. For example, the pathways sidewalks, those are it's gonna take, I don't know, 4 or 5 years to get all those done.
The federal funds are available in 27 and 28, federal fiscal year.
So we want to make sure that we keep all those costs in one place that's easy to track. And we're making sure that those grant funds are used only for that project and not intermingled or commingled someplace else. Capital projects, same thing, just a transfer to another fund, a capital project fund. The public safety and the animal control, the use tax is being used to fund the animal control officer. So we have a transfer going back to the general fund to reimburse the general fund for the salary and benefits costs and the 2 officers that we added. And then we are paying the debt service on the pickleball lease directly out of this fund. And that's just because that's how it was set up before I got here instead of moving it. And then the sales tax fund, this is the sales tax, the general 1% general sales tax, plus the marijuana sales tax is being reported in this fund. Because we only have 1 dispensary, we are not able to separately state those amounts. So if you compare this year's budget to last year's, I had it separately stated. Now I have this combined sales tax line. And just so you guys know, it's both general sales tax and that dispensary tax. And then it's paying for debt service for the Clear Creek pedestrian bridge. And then also money is going for the contractual obligation to the shops at Kearney TIF. And then the majority of that money goes to the general fund to help fund really public safety expenses.
Stephanie, could you, nothing urgent, but could you get me a ammo schedule on our debt, on all of our debt, just when it's easy for you to do so?
Mayor, it's at the back of our budget book. There is a
Debt schedule?
a debt schedule, but there is something that says future years, so that's everything after fiscal year 30.
Do you have it broken out on an annual basis?
Other than like this,
Yeah, because this is a schedule, not like a full amortization schedule.
we have it, but here it's accumulated by year, but not like for,
5 year? Is that what you
Yeah.
mean?
If you have it readily available, it's nothing I would expect you to spend a lot of time on recreating or anything by any means.
okay. And so, then if we go, I have the next three funds. Maybe I could go faster, sorry. Park capital improvements, the cemetery and the police training fund. Again, restricted funds. And although the cemetery isn't, because it's getting general fund, but there are some donations in that cemetery fund that can only be used for the cemetery, and so that's why it's broke out. It was actually in the general fund for many years, and we moved it in last year's budget out of the general fund and just in the cemetery fund. And then if we go to the park fund on page 35, you can see, again, this is a fund that has multiple different departments, so it has a summary page. Our operating revenues are $757,000, our operating expenditures are $753,000, so it does balance. There's $4,203 of revenues over expenditures when you're looking at operating, but then there is $40,000 of proposed capital outlay expenses, which obviously $4,203 comes from current year revenues, and then the rest comes from reserves.
Would it be safe to say that other revenue, that's sponsorship revenue from like amphitheater sponsorship and such?
It is money like movies in the park and kids' day in the park and just some miscellaneous. The sponsorships are in the amphitheater line item. If you look on page 36, it kind of breaks out the revenues here so you can see them more clearly. So you have billboard leases, park and shelter rentals, and then there's that miscellaneous revenue. And so our big changes in this park fund revenues are recreation fees. Part of that is because there are two new programs, 55 plus recreation, I called it yoga in here. Also adult softball. There's in the soccer line item, this year there's a Challenger soccer camp that is being offered. And then pickleball is a huge hit, and the growth in that program just continues. Also, there is, the park board did approve a fee increase in recreation fees, trying to cover the cost entirely of the service that's being provided. One of the things I think that you guys should know is that senior trips, those they've not been able to fill the spots if they increase the cost to what it requires to provide the service. And so the senior trips are going away this year.
So I want to make that clear, that's only the senior trips of the city of Kearney. It's nothing to do with the Kearney Senior Center, correct?
Correct. Yes, we have nothing to do with seniors. And then for expenses, their administrative services increased, which is why the general fund increased the transfer to the park. And then their electricity costs look like they needed to increase the budget based on what is actual. And so they did that and took that into account for next year. And then their recreation programs, because they're getting more revenue, those expenses will also increase.
Sheila, can I ask you a question on page 38?
Yes.
Under the fireworks events, it says a park request of $49,650. Was that a typo or?
No, they had a really good idea of doing a drone show, partnering, like, in adding a drone show, but they just couldn't afford it.
That sounds cool. Okay.
Donations were accepted.
And that's something, like, every department takes what you guys are saying during the priority setting session and really taking your goals and trying to figure out how to do things better, but sometimes there's just not enough revenue to be able to do that.
Yeah. No, that was just a big difference. I was just kind of wondering what that was. But that is kind of cool.
Yeah, it would be so awesome if we could figure out how to pay for it. And then capital outlay, which is on I have a little note here in my book on page 40 that the amphitheater events includes 4 free community concerts. We talked about recreation, and then capital outlay, $25,000 for a mower and $15,000 for soccer goals. And then this is the transportation sales tax fund, also known as our street department. You can see that there are, on page 43, there's $1.9 million of operating revenues. There's $1.5 million of operating expenditures. That gives us almost $500,000 of revenues over expenditures, but there's $850,000 of capital outlay that is planned. The projected end-of-year fund balance amount is $282,000. And then if you look at revenues, really, revenues are pretty flat. A small, well, they're pretty flat. And then our expenditures, we have, really the big changes is mowing right-of-way costs, for right-of-way maintenance increased, mowing for the storm drainage maintenance, they're on page 45 under storm drainage maintenance. And then if you look at property insurance in fiscal year 2025 versus 26, that was claims expense. So in our insurance, not only is it the premium, but we are also putting deductibles. Includes that. And then in on the next page, we kind of broke out the cost of street preservation that's in the operating budget. So it includes kind of the supplies to keep to do in-house work, things that we're doing. So you can see there's $88,000 of street preservation expenses, and that includes asphalt, street striping, rock, crack sealing, culvert and drainage, sidewalk maintenance, and curb and gutter maintenance. Those are materials for those things.
Can we go back to 45, that last property and liability? Is that because of our new, the new insurance carrier that we just switched to?
The reduction is because of deductibles, claims and claims expense.
Okay.
And then if you look on page 47, here's the really good stuff that we wish that we had a lot more money, because we know that we need to be investing more money in taking care of our streets, to be able to get ahead of it or just to keep up with it. But there's $460,000 for street milling and overlaying. There's $40,000 in there for a side-by-side with snow removal attachments. There's $200,000 in there for a bridge replacement program, so that's not necessarily identified for a specific project. We know that someday we are going to have to repair a very expensive bridge, so we are trying to start setting money aside now to make sure that there are funds available at that time, or at least a good chunk of it. there is money set in there for specifically the Raymond Hall Bridge, $60,000. We have money for the MS4 stormwater program, money to finish up the transportation master plan, money to finish up the stormwater master plan, and then $10,000 for garage doors. And then this slide has 3 funds again at once. The capital improvement sales tax, that is a 1/2-cent sales tax that we are receiving, which is funding really debt payments. So we are transferring money, and I believe that debt payment is paying for Watson Drive. And then the Geo Bond one. And then we have contractually 50% by state law of our economic activity taxes from the shops at Kearney that goes to reimburse certified costs. Then we have the water and sewer revenue fund.
So that explains the continued transfer to the shops at Kearney?
Yes.
Okay, that's strictly only for reimbursed certified costs?
Yes. And then water and sewer revenue fund. So it used to be that we had a combined water and sewer fund. It was really hard to kind of see what the rates for water should be compared to the rates for sewer. And so we split that out to make sure that we were complying with state law. And no money is going in there. What we're using, this money, we don't know, does it belong to water? Does it belong to sewer? So we're basically using the balance of this money for projects, capital outlay projects for water and sewer until we use it all, but it can be used for either water or sewer projects. And then the water capital improvement fund, that is where we are paying for water line replacement. South Clark is what was planned for that. And then the Kearney West Side CID looped water line. That project is also budgeted in this fund. That money, that cost will be reimbursed to the city through that West Side CID, those CID revenues. And then sewer capital improvements. All of the expenses that are budgeted in this fund are to reduce the I&I, inflow and infiltration into the sewer system. And so then the water construction fund is, this is where the water tower is budgeted for, and the Gateway West water line. Also, the Gateway West water line will be reimbursed. Those costs will be reimbursed to the city through a property tax assessment for, not property tax, special tax assessment to the property owners in that area.
Sheila, while we're talking about our water tower replacement, this was a good reminder of me of a gracious donation, or I guess a transfer of grant money from the Clay County Commission to the city of Kearney of roughly $800,000 that did allow us to build that water tower. So another thank you to our friends at the Clay County Commission for sharing some of their COVID money with us.
Yes. Let's see. Then if we advance to page 55, this is the highway construction fund. This is where you can see the cost of the total 19th Street Complete Street project. Here it's called 19th and 33 intersection improvements. But just so you know, it's like $8.7 million. We will be working on engineering fees, and most of this expense will get carried over to the next fiscal year, because we're not actually constructing it. But this is what is helping make sure that we have that match available, because we do not want to get down to where they're giving us the money and we don't have the match. it will disqualify us from getting future federal grants because they don't like to commit money to somebody that can't commit back, that we would have the match. So that's super important. Then we have for the nation, in this fund also, Nation Road Complete Street Project. It's only $800,000. That money is for engineering fees. We got really close. We scored pretty well, just not as well as we did on the 19th Street Complete Street Project. The hope is that next year, when the grant application process opens, we're able to successfully receive a federal grant for the Nation Road Complete Street Project. And hopefully that match will come from the property owners and that Gateway West CIP or from development in that area.
And that's Nation Road from 92
South.
south, okay.
Yes.
Sheila, so the estimation of $800,000 in engineering fees, I assume I know the answer and you don't know the requirements for any future grants, but have you ever seen the ability where if we would upfront $800,000 in engineering costs, have you ever seen any grants where we could get reimbursed that portion or consideration, or is that just a cost of doing business and?
It's the cost of doing business.
Design fees are not eligible in the MARC region, they only match construction. The grants are only for construction, and it does cover construction engineering or like inspection.
Okay.
Is that whole area out there on hold till we get that grant?
Which one?
Like any development, is it all on hold until we get that grant?
No.
No? Okay.
We need the water line for development
Yeah.
to occur, but there's a street already there, so.
Okay. But I mean, we're not holding up anything by waiting for this, right?
No, not at all.
Good.
We are moving right along. Then the street construction fund,
Sheila,
yes.
before we continue, would the board consider placing a motion for like a 3 or 4 minute recess before we continue on?
Sure.
Fine.
Do we need a formal motion?
I make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next.
Opposed? Let's do a 5-minute recess. It's 7:48. We will be back here in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Street construction. Page 56. I've been talking for an hour.
Can we all get through the restroom in 5 minutes?
Probably not.
Somebody better run downstairs.
There's a restroom downstairs.
Yeah, that's where I'm headed, downstairs.
I'm good. I just need to stand up so I don't fall asleep. And I was like,
You find it so riveting.
Yeah,
Just-
I do.
Sunday is completely bored by finance stuff, and she has yawned several times, and she's right in my face, and I'm like, don't look at her.
Energized right now.
I'll get the
Not as energized as that.
aesthetics or something.
She loves budget.
Did you read my novel?
I'm so sorry that you had to sit for this long meeting.
No, I mean, normally we got a bunch of tattoos and.
Just for mom, just for dog. I thought the computer was going to.
Yeah, so.
so good.
Does it?
You're welcome.
Drinkable.
Glad we can help.
All right, at this time, we will reconvene the meeting from recess at 7:55. Sheila, go ahead with your, continue with your presentation, rather. Thank you.
So we were on page 56, and this is the street construction fund, and we have budgeted basically the remaining funds to try to close them out, and we're just setting that money aside for future banners and flag replacements. And then on page 57, this is the water and sewer sinking fund. This, please.
I intended to talk to you about this last week. And seeing the wayfinding signs on here made me, reminded me rather that I did never emailed you. I think there's a few of our wayfinding signs where those poles supporting the sign itself are warped, I think really damaged. So if you can maybe have somebody take a look at that.
Okay.
Please.
Perfect, we will do it. And then the water and sewer sinking fund has $154,000 budgeted. Again, this money, it belongs to water and sewer, can be used for either project. There's not a lot of money there, but we're using it strategically depending on what project comes up, needs to be funded. In this case, we did receive $80,000 grant from DNR this year. That money is going to be used for an integrated management plan, which will look at the assets for water, sewer, and stormwater, and then also do a utility rate study.
Yeah, Sheila, here a while back, we were talking about, and I don't know, maybe you scrapped it up. I'm just, off the top of my head, we're talking about a new underground holding tank at the water. Was that what that grant was for?
No, that grant is an integrated management plan, so it's still, well, Shelley, do you want to talk about it?
So we haven't got that grant yet.
Now, this grant we have received, we just haven't, we've been awarded by DNR, but we haven't brought it to the board yet. So it should be coming to the board in the next month or so. We just don't have a lot of experience with DNR, so I don't know, once we get all the documents together, how long it takes for them to review and get it back to us.
Okay.
But this is more of a planning study that looks at all three, like the water, stormwater, and sewer, and it looks at it from more of an asset and a regulatory that helps us get a long-range plan on being able to take care of those assets. While trying to stay within regulation, so.
It's very important. As we know, we just hit another threshold once we hit over 10,000 people, and we're going to continue to grow, so.
It's a 20-year plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we're gonna start talking about the water and sewer funds. Water has its own separate fund and sewer has its own separate fund. But combined, I really want to talk about water and sewer rates because this affects both funds. So the proposed budget includes a water and sewer rate increase to address rising costs associated with making sure that we are able to continue delivering safe and reliable water and wastewater treatment. And as you know, there's always additional regulations. We have a lot of aging infrastructure that we need to invest in to make sure that it is up to date and that we continue replacing all of the components so that we can continue delivering that service. In addition, there's just increased operating costs. Inflation has been crazy over the last few years. Our water and sewer treatment plants, both of them, use a lot of electricity. They have a lot of chemicals that are required for testing. There is a lot of equipment that is required that we have to maintain. And then we are also looking at investing in future growth. Because if we aren't growing, then all of the cost of the maintenance of the system falls on the current population. And there's no way to be able to spread those costs to reduce the burden on existing taxpayers. So There is a increase in both water and sewer rates. You can see that it is 28 cents for the first 1,000 gallons of water and $1.25 for the first 1,000 gallons of sewer. There is, for the next 1,000 gallons, it's 25 cents for the next 1,000 gallons, and then 79 cents for the next 1,000 gallons of sewer, and then for each additional 1,000 gallons after that, you're talking about 28 cents per 1,000 gallons for water and 93 cents for sewer. I think that it's really important to look at a comparison of, we are in a situation in this country where nationally, most of our original water and sewer infrastructure that got put in, it's aging out. We have reached kind of the maximum cost, and that is reflected in all of our surrounding communities. And you can see that right now, Kearney has one of the lowest rates. If you look at all of our customers, the average residential customer, most of our residential customers use 3,000 gallons of water and sewer a month. And so that's why I picked 3,000 gallons as our comparison. And you can see that we right now are definitely the lowest, and then we will still be one of the lowest when we increase. North Kansas City was shown on this graph in the past. They are in a unique situation. They supplement their water and sewer rates with their gaming fund, and other cities don't have that possibility. And so I removed them from this, but they also are increasing each year. Not even having a gaming, a riverboat is helping them not increase costs. So if you look at page 58, this is the water summary. You can see the reason that we had to do this rate increase is our operating revenues with the rate increase are showing at 3.5 million. Our operating expenditures are also 3.5 million. There's a very slight revenues over expenditures. It's $11,631. The capital outlay that is budgeted and proposed in this year's budget is $671,000. The only reason that we have that $671,000 of fund balance is because the water tower, like we had budgeted for the debt service for the water tower, and the issuance of that debt got delayed a little bit because of getting it bid out and the project bid out. So we didn't need to, even though we had been planning on it. And so just so you guys know, that surplus from previous years came from being able to delay the principal and interest payments. That debt has been issued. We are forging ahead. We have to make those debt service payments. The projected end of year fund balance is $84,000. We used the water master plan that was presented to you that has a plan of what assets that we need to be replaced to do our capital outlay replacement. And what we're trying to do is have a nice stable amount so it's not fluctuating like this, where we are planning the future capital outlay needs. The integrated management plan will also help with that.
On bulk water sales, on the revenue piece, who are our customers there? Out-of-town construction companies fill in like their ditch witch machines, or is that pretty much it? And do we offer a discounted rate on that?
No, not a discounted. I only know because Stephanie's telling me.
No, it's primarily honestly landscaping companies and concrete companies who come and fill up their big tanks because they're watering plants or doing construction. Those are probably our biggest bulk of customers. Okay. But no, they just, they actually get charged the rate, the top like level where all additional gallons, that's the rate that they pay.
So, $3.5 million of expenses. We were, I don't know if you guys remember, but last year we added an employee an additional full-time employee to operate the water treatment plant more. And so our Kansas City, Missouri water purchases actually decreased. And you can see that savings of,
I think that's the first time I've been asking for that forever, so kudos to staff for making that happen. Way more economical for us to make our own water than buy it from Kansas City.
as long as we're operating that plant, it's cheaper to run it for longer, yes. And then just kind of talking about our water capital outlay expenses, there's almost $700,000 of expenses of proposed capital outlay. There's a little bit of money left over from the lead and copper rule compliance. That was a big project this year that I think our water department did amazing at handling and meeting the federal deadline. Then you have, but it's ongoing. And so we will continue doing parts of that, but we met our first big milestone. Then there's $30,000 for the Kansas City, Missouri meter pit clay valve. There's $17,000 for well casing maintenance, $94,000 for filter rehab, $50,000 for a roof replacement at the water treatment plant. There's $12,133 for a capital outlay replacement program. What we did is we took the capital outlay that we were able to buy and replace in last year's budget or this current year's budget. And what we did is we said, okay, this asset it's gonna be 15 years before we have to do this again. It's gonna be 10 years before we have to do this one again, 20 years before that. So we took the cost, we divided it by the number of years before we have to do it again. And then we did a 2% inflationary estimate. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it so that we are setting cash aside so that we have cash on hand to make that purchase, to make that replacement in the future. So that we're not in a situation where we're having to borrow money for all of these costs. At the very beginning of the budget presentation, $4.5 million is what our principal and interest payments are in this year's budget, which is one of our biggest categories of spending. And so it's important that absolutely has a place, but we want to do smart debt where we're planning for it, where we are intentionally not in a situation where we don't have a choice and we have to do it. So that's what that capital outlay replacement program amount is. And that will just be increasing the amount that we're contributing to that. You should expect it to be increasing each year as we are able to replace and invest more and more money into our system. Water line replacement, there's $231,000 there. Ground storage tank caulking, $70,000. Backup power generator for our wells, $65,000. $60,000 for fire repainting, $15,000 for recarb repainting, $17,000 for security cameras. It's very important that we are able to monitor and make sure that our drinking water is staying safe. And then battery operated valve exerciser at $6,200.
Are these security cameras going at the plant or out at the wells or?
Plant.
Plant?
Awesome team, super knowledgeable.
Sheila, I got a question for you. On page 59, it says meter set fees, proposed budget's 40,000. Then on 61, it says meter parts, 40,000. Is that dollar for dollar or I don't see any labor there for meter set fees. Is there any labor in that?
We don't, and we actually had a debate after this because really our meter set fee should be paying for the equipment and the people. However, staff is pretty sure that the amount that we are paying for the meter set, or that we are charging for a meter set, is not even covering the actual cost of the meter. And Stephanie is nodding. One of the things that we are doing, we ran out of time before this budget, but will be coming to you guys next year, is we are looking at all the fees that we're charging. And we're also doing a comparison to what the rates are at others, but we're telling you, we're actually gonna dig in and figure out how much it is costing us to provide those services so that you guys can make a good decision of what to set fees at. I think it's been a while since we've done a thorough review of that, but that is going to be coming.
So in reality, this may be off a little bit.
It might be off a little bit. I feel still pretty comfortable with it if we look at, what our actual expense was in fiscal year '24, and then, you know.
24 is almost $40,000.
Yeah.
Set fees, and of course your parts were 45,000.
Yeah.
One of the biggest factors is the cost of those meters has gone up tremendously since COVID. And so looking at historical is, we had a meter inventory at a much lower cost than replacing that inventory now. So it's.
How many of those do we keep on hand, you know? That's all right.
You guys ready to move on to the sewer fund?
Yeah.
Okay, page 63, this is the summary page. You can see $3 million of operating revenues, $3 million of operating expenditures, hoping for $4,572 of revenues over expenditures, and we are spending $150,000 on capital outlay, which is basically all coming from savings. And that savings is because is really from this year's vacancies. That's why we had savings. We had a lot of vacancies at that sewer treatment plant for a little while. And that's where that savings came from. And then the fiscal year '26 proposed budget overview page, sorry, I got lost here. The expenses, basically the changes, a big change. So our debt amortization schedules were how they were designed, were not where you were kind of like for your house payment, you're paying the same amount over the entire term. There was kind of stacking. And so if you look at our debt fees on page 66, you can see that in fiscal year '26, our debt was almost $952,000, and then it jumped up $100,000. And so, and then we need some money for cybersecurity software enhancements also, and so those are our big changes from the prior year. And then if you look at their capital outlay, it's computer equipment for $12,000, mower and trailer for $30,000, which will allow them to reduce their outside mowing expense, pump equipment replacement, $100,000, and a spectrophotometer at $8,000. Good job. Then we have park construction fund at $1.1 million. This is where we have the money budgeted and set aside for Hall Park. Also, there was, if you remember back to the park operating fund, there just is not a lot of money to do capital out items. They are running on such a narrow budget. So with use tax revenues, thankfully, we're able to do some other capital proposals, and those are money in the pickleball and skate park capital outlay skate ramps for the skate park, $48,000. I think there's 2 of them. There's some money under Lions Park for movie equipment, because I think I forgot to tell you when we were talking about the park fund, they are planning on doing movies in the park this summer at Lions Park. And then there's also money that is being carried over from fiscal year 25 in Lions Park for the Pour in Place playground surfacing. There's a seam that of the work that has already been done that the company said, do not pay us until we fix that seam. So that payment, we carried over that money to be able to pay it in fiscal year 26. We're gonna do some bathroom doors at McPorter Park, and at Jesse James Park, there's $62,500 budgeted to replace the web climber that has reached its end of life, and the merry-go-round.
In this park budget, do we get money for redoing any walking trails out there in McPorter?
We are almost there.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Then on page 70, by the way, just so that's in the sidewalk trail construction budget, not in the park capital projects budget.
Okay.
So page 70 is the stormwater projects. We transferred money from the capital improvement sales tax to do the Silhouette Drive, Shadowbrook project. There's still some money, and we have a need to do a replacement of the 504 Southbrook Drive culvert. And so that's where that money is coming from. It's just money that we didn't have to spend for the Shadowbrook.
Is that something that we can complete in-house, or will we be looking for?
We have looked at and decided to do that in-house this summer.
Awesome.
You are gonna do it in-house? That's great.
We'll probably save money on that.
Absolutely.
So then we can use it for another stormwater project next year. Okay, and then here, Alderman Holt is on page 71, is the sidewalk trail construction. So there's $4.5 million of expense budgeted. The biggest portion of that are the pathways projects. So Regency Drive, 92 Highway, and then some pedestrian crossings at the trail crossings across the road. And then she's going to build some sidewalk connections in downtown and at Stone Lake.
Yeah, they're just, there's 3 projects, like a couple blocks each left on the pathways map. One's like in Stone Lake, Stonecrest, and one's like up by James, I think it's called. And then the Lions Park crossing, and then there's 3 pedestrian crossings on 19th Street, and then one on Meadowbrook that will get the flashing warning lights added. And those projects will be under construction this year.
Yeah,
The crossing and gaps, but not the Regency Drive, the other. They're all in the same pot. There's 2 projects in that pot.
I really appreciate all of staff's work on receiving those grant funds that truly will allow us to hit a big dent in that list that we approved voters 3 years ago. So this is remarkable.
It's all of the projects on the list.
So yeah, it's the full list that was promised.
They're all fully funded,
Yes, that's exciting.
but they're not under construction.
We'll get there.
In time.
Also planning on starting next spring, probably the construction of the Route 33 McPorter Connector Trail, which is that first project, the $971,000. And then we have $75,000 for the Connected Kearney plan. That is a planning study that it's going to do 2 things, and I get super excited about it. One, once we finish all the projects that we promised to voters for these connected paths, it's going to tell us where to go next. Like how best to prioritize our money after we have those projects completed. And this plan gives us additional points on our grant applications when we apply for more federal funds to help us leverage our money from just our citizens. And then here you can see the very last project, trail reconstruction. It's $270,000 put in there. And the plan is, it's not budgeted in the revenue, but the plan is there are some trail grants that possibly we'll be able to leverage that even more.
All of our trails are in desperate need.
Yes.
Yes. Then we have the page 72, the building improvement fund. This is where we are anticipating paying with a debt issue, but we are anticipating paying for a remodel of City Hall to make it ADA compliant and to do safety enhancements. Also, to do a project at the museum to make sure that the exterior is well protected and operating so that we're not destroying what's inside of our buildings.
Now, are both of these set aside, but is construction going to start this year?
We are still trying to figure out a plan that we can afford. So we did some planning this year, but the costs were more than we could afford.
So this is going to carry over to next year?
Yes. And then the next, page 73, this is how we're paying for the Watson Drive debt. You can see that, we're transferring $700,000 in from that capital improvement sales tax. And then the page 74 is the debt. We're paying the debt on the new interchange. Page 75, this is called an inmate security fund. The revenue comes from a fee for our inmates, and it can only be used for the live scan fingerprinting system. We actually have to purchase that. This $14,000 will be transferred to general fund. The cost is more than that. So it's being budgeted as one of the general fund capital projects, but we're transferring the $14,000 from this inmate security fund to pay for part of the equipment that is eligible to be spent with this money. Page 76, this is the K-9 fund. This was used to buy our new dog Havoc, and so we're just not planning on spending any money out of it. That money has been budgeted in the police department for ongoing expenses. Then we have the wireless capital improvement fund. It's paying for debt service on the police station, museum, and police training room. And then we have shops at Kearney TIF. And this is just the contractual legal obligation that we have to pay the certified costs. So the revenues that come in, they go to pay off the certified costs. And, I'm done with all my budget pages, but I did 2 more slides because I think this is really important. We had the department request column, and then we had the proposed budget column because we could not fund all the requests that were made. And I think it's important to kind of call to attention the things that departments requested that we weren't able to fund. So, personnel costs, we weren't able to fund $1.3 million of positions that were requested, and that included 3 SROs, a dedicated officer to just community policing, a police records clerk, a deputy court clerk, a park maintenance position. We wanted to also do a cost of living adjustment for employees, but we were not able to do that. And one of the things that we look at every year is trying to increase our loggers benefit from an L7 plan to an L6. And so you can kind of see the total amount that each of those would have cost, and we weren't able to fund those personnel costs.
I assume those are like our total comp, like employer paid taxes, benefits, everything, or those estimates as far as the,
Like the positions?
Yes.
Yeah, it is salary plus benefits. It's the cost of a full-time position, all encompassing.
okay, thank you.
Yes. And then,
Does that take into account any part-time, like our part-time parks guys in the summer and that kind of stuff?
they requested, instead of a part-time person this year, they requested a full-time additional person. And so you can see that $85,000 is salary and benefits of one additional full-time position that they requested,
Okay,
but
so
did
it's a no
not fund it.
Because I know in the past we've done that part-time.
And we still have done it. They didn't request to add more to that. So these are just costs of requests from each department for additional new things that we could not fund.
Gotcha.
We didn't eliminate any positions or any part-time positions or anything like that. And then you have fiscal year 26 total unfulfilled non-personnel costs, totaling $3.6 million, $1 million of general fund expenses, $55,000 of park fund expenses, $525,000 of transportation fund expenses, $1 million of water fund, and $1 million of sewer fund. And I just think that it's really important to kind of put it into perspective that there are, just like people at home, like all of us at home, cities also have to make hard decisions and prioritize and allocate their resources to provide the services that are being provided. And there's not more revenues available than there are needs. There are much higher needs than there are revenues. And that is all I have.
Sheila, I appreciate all your work thus far, all the department heads' work. I wish we had a lot more revenues that we knew what to do with, but unfortunately, we all know that's not the case. So are there any further, there was a lot of questions this evening, which I appreciate, and so I appreciate the elected body asking those questions to staff this evening. Do you guys have any further questions on the administrator's review of the proposed fiscal year 2026 budget?
I do not.
All right, thank you so much for that report. Does that conclude your presentation?
It does.
Good. All right, we'll move on to mayor's communications this evening. Two things real quick I want to mention is I'm a Rotarian of Kearney Rotary, and thank you to our city administrator. I was in charge of our presentation last week, and she gave the same budget overview that we received 2 weeks ago to our Rotarians, and there's some good questions and conversation there. So thank you, Sheila, for attending and doing that for me. And then I also just want to show some quick appreciation to Molly, one of our water department clerks. Called me and like, you have 45,000 gallons of water usage in like 3 days this month already. So after my initial shock and her calming me down, she totally had the situation under control the whole time. And I think it was a programming error on the update from our new software. So thankfully I don't have like a $3,000+ water bill. It was a true error, but nonetheless, I was freaked out. It was my first experience though of seeing, of kind of knowing what our residents feel like when there's an error or a leak or all that stuff. But Molly, Jake and some of his crew responded, checked everything out, and just appreciate. That's the first time I've been able to kind of experience that myself as a resident. So wanted to make sure I pass that along as well. We'll move on to city administrator's report.
The only thing I have is that our next regular board meeting will be on a Tuesday night. because of the President's Day holiday, so that will be February 18th.
Great. We'll move on to Alderman discussion. Alderman Barker,
I don't have anything this evening.
Alderman Lehman,
I have nothing.
Alderman Holt.
I would like to take a moment to thank a fellow citizen of Kearney who has passed away in Bev Corm. Bev was a two-time alderman for the city of Kearney. She dedicated a lot of her time to this town. If you've ever had the chance to meet her, you know she's quite a character and was a lot of fun. Truly was one of those people that loved our community and gave back to it, not only as a civil servant, but in many ways. She was actually, when she was a younger person, she was just as active as, the Webbers and the rest of them. She was right in there. She was part of our forefathers, per se, for us. And we lost a beautiful lady. And I just want to take time to thank her. That's all I got to say.
Thank you for that, Alderman Holt. I knew Bev for obviously my whole life, but I never knew that she was a past public servant and being an alderman. So
Yeah.
that concludes alderman discussion. If we could entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.